Imagine this. You've been struggling with persistent, unexplained stomach pain for years. Every meal feels like a gamble, leaving you in discomfort, frustration, and sometimes despair. You've visited countless doctors, undergone invasive tests, and still no one can tell you what's wrong.
If you get a gastric emptying scintigraphy test and you have slow emptying, that's gastroparesis. It doesn't say anything about what's causing it. If you actually think about the population of the world at about 8 billion people, you have about 1 billion people that have GI issues right now. It's not like having heart disease or the flu. It's just a description.
What if we could change that? What if there was a way to decode the mysteries of the gut in real time?
In our system, we let the patient enter some of their symptoms or their activities like meals or bowel movements, a fairly sophisticated data analysis at the end of the test that we collect into something that a doctor wants to look at, which has to be simplified greatly.
And at the forefront of this revolution is GTAC Medical, a company that's transforming how we approach gut health through groundbreaking wearable technology. Today, I'm joined by the brilliant mind driving this transformation, Dr. Steve Axelrod.
Going from an elementary particle physicist to a gastrophysicist, which I think I'm maybe one of the world's only gastrophysicists.
We'll explore what it takes to lead such a groundbreaking company, the challenges.
The biggest challenge in a startup, and we're just 4 people, is just attracting capital.
So whether you are passionate about the intersection of technology or medicine, curious about how innovation can change lives, or simply fascinated by the untapped potential of gut health, this episode is for you.
You know what IBS is? It's a and I'd like to offer you a job in marketing at GTAC Medical because that was absolutely brilliant intro.
I'm all available for you at your service.
If you need my job, I can just go back to being a scientist and you can take your golden voice to help us move forward.
Oh, that is so kind of you. I'm at your service. Whenever you need me, I'll be there. Hello and welcome to another episode of Drug Diaries, a podcast where we explore the latest trends and innovations shaping the world of healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and biotechnology. Imagine this. You've been struggling with persistent, unexplained stomach pain for years. Every meal feels like a gamble, leaving you in discomfort, frustration, and sometimes despair. You've visited countless doctors, undergone invasive tests, and still no one can tell you what's wrong. For millions of people around the world, this isn't just a bad day. It's their everyday life. Gastrointestinal disorders like irritable bowel syndrome, gastroparesis, and functional dyspepsia affect nearly 40% of global population at some point in their lives. That's billions of people left grappling with uncertainty, pain, and the emotional toll of living with an obscure illness. And yet for decades, the way we have diagnosed and managed these conditions has remained stagnant, relying on outdated invasive methods that provide limited insights, and all too often, no clear answers. But what if we could change that? What if there was a way to decode the mysteries of the gut in real time, without hospital visits, invasive procedures, or guesswork? What if with just a simple wearable device, we could empower patients and doctors alike with the data needed to truly understand and treat gastrointestinal disorders? The good news is, this isn't a hypothetical future. It's happening now. And at the forefront of this revolution is GTAC Medical, a company that's transforming how we approach gut health through groundbreaking wearable technology. Their innovative solution is giving us a new window into the complex world of gastrointestinal function, helping doctors diagnose more accurately, treat more effectively, and most importantly, improve patient lives. Today, I'm joined by the brilliant mind driving this transformation, Dr. Steve Axelrod, the CEO of GTAC Medical. With a fascinating journey from physics to digital health innovation, Steve has dedicated his career to solving one of healthcare's most persistent challenges. Under his leadership, GTAC Medical is not only advancing the science of gut health, but also rewriting the narrative for millions of patients worldwide. In this conversation, we'll dive deep into the problem GTAC is solving, the innovative technology behind their solutions, and the profound impact this work is having on healthcare and patient outcomes. We'll explore what it takes to lead such a groundbreaking company, the challenges they've faced along the way, and what the future holds for gastrointestinal health. So whether you are passionate about the intersection of technology or medicine, curious about how innovation can change lives, or simply fascinated by the untapped potential of gut health, this episode is for you. Steve, welcome to Drug Diaries.
Thank you, Kaushik. It's an honor to be here. And I'd like to offer you a job in marketing at GTAC Medical because that was absolutely brilliant intro.
I'm all available for you.
Maybe you need my job. I can just go back to being a scientist and you can take your golden voice, to help us move forward.
Well, that is so kind of you. I'm at your service. Whenever you need me, I'll be there.
Be careful what you promise.
I'll honor my promise.
So what's left to talk about?
Okay, so let's get started with what inspired your journey from physics to leading GTAC Medical.
Yeah, going from an elementary particle physicist to a gastrophysicist, which I think I'm maybe one of the world's only gastrophysicists. I was very excited about science as a kid. I wanted to be a nuclear physicist at age 8 because I read Marvel comic books. And I know if you got bit by a radioactive spider, you get superpowers, or maybe if you were in outer space and got hit by cosmic rays, you'd get superpowers. And then, then we also landed on the moon, and that was pretty cool. So I became an elementary particle physicist. I got my PhD, and then I was tired of winter in the East Coast. So I came out to sunny California, and I was so lucky to get a postdoc position at Stanford University in Palo Alto. And then after my postdoc was up at 3 years, I just loved the Bay Area. And so I just took a job in industry. So it's pretty hard to get an academic job. I thought working in pure science like particle physics with quarks and leptons and Higgs bosons was very cool, but it wasn't really an opportunity, a career opportunity. So I went into local industry and developed things like nuclear and X-ray and infrared sensors and big scanning platforms for a company that eventually got bought by Honeywell. And then after about 15 years, Honeywell decided to outsource the jobs because Silicon Valley was expensive. And so I laid off my group and laid off myself and found an opportunity at a medical device startup in the area. I had to go back to being a bench scientist and individual contributor instead of director of a group. But that was fine. I always kept my hands in the technology. So just being able to work in an area that was helping healthcare, pure science was great, and then helping people was also great. And I noticed my young daughters were a lot more excited about me working on a new treatment for breast cancer than they were about the world's best sensor for measuring paper thickness. So I was really then totally into the whole idea of working in medical devices. And then, as startups often go, after about 5 years, that company was sold and a lot of us were laid off. And then I eventually wound up here at GTAC in late 2011. I became the CEO and came with some ideas and worked, and now here we are.
That was a very fascinating journey. And you mentioned this already, but I'm going to ask you, how did you become interested in wearable health technologies, particularly for gastrointestinal health?
It wasn't so much that I was interested in wearables per se. It was my interest in this particular area is because my younger daughter, Lindsay, has Crohn's disease. And at the age of 13 in 2007, she spent 5 weeks in the hospital. But my mother died of colon cancer. My sister is a survivor. And I have other family members that have unexplained gastrointestinal issues. So it's an area very, very close to my heart. And that really helped through all the early days where we didn't have funding, just trying to work on something that, meant something personally to me and my family. And then also, as you say in the intro, to millions of patients just in the United States. And if you actually think about the population of the world at about 8 billion people, you have about 1 billion people that have GI issues right now.
So that almost became a personal mission for you.
Very much
And
so. And then you had asked about wearables. It just became apparent when we were thinking about how to do something for the gut. Myoelectric measurements have been around for a very long time, but they were done in an office setting or a laboratory setting with patients sitting still for an hour just measuring the stomach. We realized that really didn't go anywhere, and we needed to come up with something that was going to be a lot more patient friendly. At that point in time, Apple came out with the iPhone 4S that had Bluetooth in it, and then a light bulb went off. I said, oh, if the iPhone has Bluetooth, all smartphones are going to have Bluetooth next year, and we can do something based on Bluetooth. So how about something that's like a patch that people wear, and they're going to have their phone with them all the time, and it's going to save us from having to build some box or use wires, and let us get to a price point that would be reimbursable.
So much lighter version to what you could have imagined before the advent of this technology.
Yeah, so I like to say that back in the days of the caveman, they never could have done this. But with all the advances in things like Bluetooth and smartphones and miniature electronics, adhesives for wearables, very, very important, that made all this, I would say, inevitable. And there were people back then in 2011, 2012 said, oh, the FDA will never approve this. And my point of view was they're going to have to, because these are just going to proliferate and they'll figure it out.
And looking back, what have been the key turning points in your career as both a scientist and a CEO?
Wow. I've been around for a while, so there's a bunch, right? I mean, just deciding to go into science as a kid, and I think getting the postdoc position at Stanford and coming to the Bay Area and just being immersed in the Bay Area. Technology and medical device is very big out here, and just having those opportunities. And then, as I said before, the family story, Lindsay's Crohn's disease, and my mom and my sister are just providing so much impetus for me to get involved in this. Those are really the main turning points.
Can you tell us a little bit about GTAC Medical's wearable technology and the product, and how does it work?
Yeah, so I thought you'd never ask. So it's a very light wearable. Can I show you on the camera? Will that come through?
Yeah, would love to. Yeah, definitely.
So there's a demo-only patch, right? So you see, this is the top side. And there's a thing here you pull in order to get it started once it's put on the body, and that lets the battery circuit complete. This is the bottom side, and you see those circles. Those are electrodes. So there are 4 pairs of electrodes. So we take bipolar pairs, as we call it, to measure the difference between what we pick up. And 2 are vertical and 2 are horizontal, and you actually pick up different signals that way. So you wear 3 patches, 2 above the belly button and 1 below the belly button, to give us coverage of the entire GI tract, stomach, small intestine, and colon. The patches read these electrical signals continuously for up to 6 days. So you put the patches on, you pair it to your smartphone. We have an app, and that app collects data via Bluetooth from the patches continuously for that 6-day period, day and night, just continuously. And then the app lets you enter if you've had a meal, or you're having pain, or you've had a bowel movement. You can enter very simple things like that, trying to keep it very low touch for the patient. Patient's just going about their normal daily life. App transfers the data every 20 minutes to a secure web server. And then at the conclusion of the 6-day test, we process the data in the cloud and provide a report to the physician. So from the patient's point of view, you have the patches applied, have the app downloaded to your phone, you're given some instructions, you're told to go about your normal daily life, but don't take a bath, you can shower, take care of the patches so they stay adhered. It's kind of like wearing a Band-Aid on your belly. It turns out that the abdomen is a challenging place to wear something, because it folds a lot. And some abdomens are convex and some are concave. Most are convex to various degrees. And it just, you stand up and you sit down and things fold a lot. But we've, thanks to advances in adhesives and materials, we're able to have patches that stay on. I've had patches worn them for as much as 14 or 15 days. So key thing is that patients go about their normal daily life. And that's where they experience these disorders. You go to the doctor and you get an hour-long test and, oh, I didn't feel my symptoms when I was at the
Mm.
doctor's office, right? So it's a big advantage to be able to measure at home as patients go about the activities and eat the foods that lead to their issues.
Right. So the patients have to keep them on for 6 days, and after that you replace it, or are these
No, it's
rechargeable?
sort of like an episodic thing, right? You've had a problem and you go to the
Mm.
doctor and the doctor says,
Right.
let's do this test. So you don't, after the 6 days, then the test is done and the doctor will say, here's what we've learned. And they may want to do a test afterwards after an intervention. And we're doing some studies now where we're looking at the change due to the intervention to see, did it really make a difference or not? And if it made a difference, where was it? Was it in the stomach? Was it in the colon? Was it what we expected from that intervention, that drug or change in diet or whatever?
Right.
And to really actually measure it without placebo effects, right? Usually you go to the doctor, they give you a drug or something, and then they ask you a few weeks later, are you better? And you
Yeah.
don't know the answer, but you know they want you to say yes. And the placebo effect in the gut is typically on the order of 35 or 40%. You give someone a sugar pill,
Wow.
35 or 40% of the time, they say they're better. And in some cases they are because it just went away, right?
Mm.
So with this objective measurement, you can actually say, yes, you are, and that's because your colon has 30% more activity now. And that's why you're not constipated anymore, or many, many other possibilities when you have 6 days of data on the stomach, small intestine, and colon.
And during these 6 days, the patients are not supposed to remove any of the patches, even temporarily, and they just stay on.
They just stay on. Yeah, it's kind of like a Band-Aid. Once you take it off and you put
Yeah.
it on, it'll never stick as well.
Not work. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad there's something like that available for patients who suffer from gastrointestinal conditions. So I've got HCM, which is hypercardiomyopathy,
Oh,
which means
okay. I
that
don't know that.
the walls of my heart have become very thick. So, and it doesn't show any symptoms. I live a perfectly normal life, but the doctors realized that I have a abnormal ECG, and that's why they said I need to install this to just keep a track. I said I'm fine. I don't need anything. They said no, we got to keep a track. What if something happens? Fine. And then they installed this. So it was an invasive procedure. Now there's a chip inside. It's like a USB port this size, which is inserted inside, and it'll have to be removed after 3 years. So there'll be another incision, which I'm not too happy about.
Yeah.
So I wish this was available for me. Is there a way this could be extended
Well, they
to
do
other
have
parts?
they have the equivalent of what we have. In fact, a board member, an early board member and friend, still a consultant, is the
Mhm.
founder of iRhythm, and they have the Zeo patch, and that's
Right.
a 2 week wear device. But it sounds like they're looking for something that's going to give them data not just for 2 weeks,
Mm.
but every day for years.
All right. And for me, I get nothing in return. It's just recording, and it probably alerts the healthcare practitioners when something goes wrong or when the ECG is abnormal. But I don't see any data here in this app. So that's what
There's
I'm going to just.
actually, there are medical devices, right? And that are wearables, and there are wearables that are interesting, and there are wearables that are fun. And the ones that are fun are going to just give you the data and not to the doctor. And then there are ones that maybe the doctor can see and you can see, and the data is such that it can make sense to you. But then there's a class of things where it's not appropriate for the patient to see what data is available in the app at
Mm,
that moment. So
right.
in our system, we let the patient enter some of their symptoms or their activities like meals or bowel movements, but we don't provide any data to them. That's
Mm,
for the physician because it requires the
I
interpretation
see.
of the physician, and it requires a fairly sophisticated data analysis at the end of the test. Convert 30 million data points that we collect
Mm,
into something that a doctor wants to look at, which has to be simplified greatly, right?
mm,
So then it's up to the doctor to share that with you. They may say, we see that your stomach and small intestine activity levels are pretty much normal, but your colon at night doesn't have that pattern that we expect to see, and that may be the explanation of why you have such constipation symptoms, right? So it's really up to the doctor to provide the interpretation of the data.
And if I may ask, what sort of data does it provide to the doctors?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's one of the challenges. As I said, we have 30 million data points,
Oh
and
my
most
God.
of them are noise because the organs are only active at specific times. And so what we're trying to do is say, when do we see activity? How strong is it? And what are its characteristics, and which organ is it coming from? And then we can look at that in many, many ways. So imagine now we take 30 million data points and we reduce it maybe to 3,000 that represent the levels and frequency of activity in little 10-minute time segments over 6 days. And you say,
Right.
well, let's just do a real simple comparison, comparing how much activity we see in your stomach, your small intestine, your colon, compared to, say, healthy controls. Are you within a range, kind of like a blood test, right? And you
Right.
know, those ranges in a blood test are wide, and people, healthy people or people who don't have GI issues have a wide range of activity that could be considered normal, but there's going to be some percentage of people that are going to be lower or higher, and combined with the patient's symptoms, then the doctors can say, okay, that's what I want to target, right? So we'll give them graphs that show or just numbers that show where people stand with respect to healthy controls, or in some cases it might be compared to a cohort that has a similar condition that they have, depending on what a physician would find more useful. And then we'll also
Right.
show the same thing, but just looking at postprandial, which means post-meal. So did your stomach start processing the food the way we expected it to? It should, as soon as you start eating your food, your stomach typically, if you're healthy, gets busy. At night, we found that the colon is actually much more busy at night. In contrast to old publications that say the gut goes to sleep at night, we found that the colon is very active at night, and patients who report constipation typically do not have that nighttime colon activity. So we'll look at diurnal effects. We'll look at when you press the bowel movement button, did we see things before that? If you press the pain button, do we see abnormal activity anywhere, right? And then we'll show some other graphics that, kind of dive deeper. But the idea is to give the physician something on page 1 that's very simple for them to get a quick overview of your status, and then give more and more detail on pages 2, 3, and 4.
And I'm assuming that the 6 patches, they target different parts of the gut and different organs, and they capture the data from different parts.
Yeah, so it is natural to think that if I have a patch in one position, that's where it's going to read the data from, right? But in fact, for the most part, that's not how it works. We tell the organs apart by their frequency, and a single patch in any one of the typical locations may be able to see all the organs, because the signals don't go the way things do, like in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
The old joke from the physicist is we always simplify problems, and so if you have a perfectly spherical cow in outer space, this is correct, right? But in reality, the signals may travel horizontally before they come out of the skin. They'll find a thinner portion in your belly where the electrical conduction is more favorable for the signals to come out. So we have the 3 patches, each with 4 channels, and we just distribute them around the abdomen so that we can get a representative sample from all the organs. Because some cases, we're going to say, oh, you have very low activity in your stomach, and that's why you're having these gastroparesis-like symptoms. But if we only use 1 patch, it may not be in the best place for a stomach signal. We might have been wrong when we said that, right? So we have to make sure that we're getting good coverage. So the 3 patches are really there to make sure that we get representative signals from each of the organs.
Right. And I think what you said about noise is also very pertinent, because if someone's walking on the treadmill, there might be different kind of noises that will disrupt the inflow of data. Someone's sitting in the car and tying the seatbelt or putting the seatbelt on. All those sort of noise would contribute to the noise, I guess.
And yet, when you say noise, I know you mean electrical noise, because the signals that we're reading are on the order of one or a few millivolts, so thousandths of a volt, very, very tiny signals compared to an EKG 10 to 100 times smaller. And so the little bit of electrical noise that you pick up from just even twisting your body a little bit, it can be bigger than those signals. So one of the approaches is when I showed you the patch, that we have the electrodes close to one another, unlike in an EKG or electrogastrography where there's a reference somewhere else, and any motion that brings those electrodes closer or further causes an errant signal, causes an artifact. But by having the pairs nearby one another, everything moves together, and so we get much fewer artifacts. But that said, if you do sit-ups, you're going to get some artifacts, and part of our algorithms are how we detect those and remove them in a way that minimizes the impact on the data.
And you have to excuse me for asking all these silly questions. It just shows my ignorance and lack of knowledge about this topic.
Well, you know, you're in 99.999% of the population, because not many people have spent years, as we have, in trying to come up with algorithms that reduce this. But I can tell you that when I'm wearing patches for, you know, testing patches, whatever, I can ride my bike to the office and I can do my workout routine, stretching and weightlifting or whatever. And it may be that there are periods during that, like if I'm doing sit-ups or certain things like push-ups that impact the patches, those points in time, the artifact removal will take out those artifacts. But most of the time, the data is still just quite usable.
Really? Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, there's magic. I mean, it's definitely magic in this whole thing that we got lucky that there are electrical signals that come from the gut. We got lucky that those signals are driven by these interstitial cells of Cajal, these pacemakers that are embedded in the walls of the stomach, small intestine, and colon. And they set up this like a carrier wave, like FM radio. And that's what controls contraction. So when your stomach is doing its work, when it's contracting to process food, it does it at a very specific frequency, 3 cycles per minute. And because we know it's at that frequency, we can ignore noise at all the other frequencies. And so we get a much better, what's called signal to noise ratio, by virtue of the fact that nature has given us these frequencies. And that the other magic is that the stomach frequency is different from the small intestine and different from the colon frequency. So that has nothing to do with whether we're competent or smart or not. That's just nature gave us a gift, that these signals make it to the skin surface. That's an accident. That's just leakage current from the muscle cells, right?
Wow.
So it's like nature has given us this path to do stuff, and it's just up to us to be competent enough to figure out how to get those signals. And then the really hard part is to say, okay, what do we do with them now? And how do we turn this into something useful for a patient and not just some interesting physics experiment?
Well, thanks to nature, and a huge credit goes to you and your team for being able to decode those messages, those signals.
Well, you know, we didn't invent all of it, or we've made our contribution, particularly outside of the stomach, but people created electrogastrography decades ago, right? And we've just taken sort of the obvious steps. Let's use modern technology to make it into a patch, and then let's take a look at all the signals and see what we can learn, and just, you know, put our nose to the grindstone and try to advance things a step, right?
Right. And what are some of GTAC Medical's biggest milestones so far, and what accomplishments are you most proud of?
I think the one I still think back on that was so important but is so trivial is when we just put EKG electrodes on my daughter Lindsay's belly. I think she was 15 or 16 at the time. And then we processed it and we saw 3 CPM signal. And I was so naive at the time, I didn't even realize what other people had done. I saw signal, and as a physicist and a measurement physicist, like, oh, we can do something with that, right? And then we started finding signals from the colon. I think, oh, this is so cool, right? That's what enabled it. And then we were able to build a prototype, not with some store-bought EKG equipment, but our own prototype that could eventually be put into a patch. And we got signals from that. It was a very klutzy thing, right? We call it the octopus. 3 levels high of PC boards and, and then when we made a prototype that actually was a nice flat patch that people could wear. But also other milestones were when we got our first funding from Breakout Labs after 2.5 years of working without funding, when we got into the Fogarty Institute for Innovation in Mountain View, where we've gotten tremendous support. We got grants from the Kenneth Renan Foundation that support IBD research, grants from NIH, grant from the Leona Helmsley Foundation that supported studies. And then, getting the first data from a clinical trial that showed something, moving forward with going from proof of concept to this is really useful data now. And that's the most recent thing. So we're saying that the data is actually actionable. A doctor can look at our results and say, okay, this is what I want to try next from a therapeutic point of view. That's the most important milestone we've ever had.
Right. I'm just trying to visualize how these devices reach the patients.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So this, as we were talking about before, there are wearables that are toys that are fun for the patient. And then the ones that are medical devices. Ours is a medical device. So if you look at the spectrum from infrared to ultraviolet, we're up there at the ultraviolet. We're a medical device, so a doctor will prescribe this. And that will always be the case, whether the doctor is a gastroenterologist and you're in their office, or it's a primary care physician someday, or it's a service that someone provides where you just go online and they will have a physician that prescribes it for you. They'll mail you the patches, you put them on, and then you'll have a telehealth visit 6 days or so later, and you never have to go to an office because everything has been done remotely through telehealth and US mail.
And I'm guessing these are reimbursable and people don't have to buy it privately.
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges we have now. So we got our FDA clearance a couple of years ago, and then we got wonderful support from the Gastrointestinal Professional Societies, the American Gastro Association, Society of Endoscopists, and in the annual meeting of the AMA, they granted us our own code. It's called a CPT code for reimbursement. But the first code you get is one where it's called a tracking code. So basically you have to prove to Medicare and the payers that people are using it all the time, and then they will pay for it. But of course, how do you get from here to there, right? This is the classic catch-22 in medical devices. When you've come up with something new, as opposed to, well, we've just come up with a better or cheaper version of something that's already out there, then you can bill to the existing code, and that's a CPT one, and payers will typically just cover that, right? When it's new, you have to show them that it's useful, and the number one way they say it's useful is if it's been used a lot. Okay, how do you get it used a lot? So you start with this tracking code, and you work with key opinion leader doctors, and you get them to have patients who are willing to either pay out of pocket if it's not reimbursed, or maybe the office will take on that risk. And then you fight with the insurance companies. And so we've had to spend money on reimbursement consultants to put together a package of information on what this does and why it's better than what's currently available, and why, from a insurance payer's point of view, you will actually want to reimburse this. Because why? Well, it'll reduce the number of tests that patients are going through now. It'll reduce the amount of time before the doctor gets to an effective therapy. It'll lower the number of office visits, and it will save you money.
Can you tell us how much this costs?
Yeah, so we've tried to keep the price of it at a point where insurance companies will say, yeah, that's very reasonable. So our list price is $600 per test. Right. So essentially what we're providing is the report, and the patches are the vehicle by which we get the data for the report. But what we're providing is the information. So at $600, that kind of fits in with other gastrointestinal tests. And it's the kind of thing where once we show that it really works and can also be retested after the intervention to show whether it worked or not, that now you're going to ask insurers, again, to pay for another test. But because we have this ability to objectively show whether or not it worked, which helps get patients to an answer to their issues more quickly, that will be seen as something that insurance companies will be happy to pay.
Right. And I think $600 for a test like this sounds pretty reasonable. It's very reasonably priced, I must say.
For a medical device, medical devices and household appliances or things are different price points. And now having gone through the process of developing one and everything you have to do to get it approved by the FDA and all the things you have to put in place to manufacture things safely and effectively really explains why everything in medicine is so much more expensive than daily life.
Where do you think wearable technology is headed in healthcare over the next 5 to 10 years?
So, I don't know that I'm that knowledgeable to answer that outside the GI space. I mean, I've obviously paid attention to it for over a decade. I think a lot of the things that you can measure are already being measured. You can measure blood pressure and you can measure sweat and things like stress through galvanic potentials, but it's kind of diminishing returns, right? I like to think that what we're doing is a little bit more unique than most of these other things. It's really hard, so most people haven't bothered to do it. I've had people tell me that, we tried and you'll never be able to do that. I've had Silicon Valley icons tell me that'll never work. So, it is hard. But then where does your question go? What else can be measured? It's more what can we do with the data? So we feel like, okay, we're providing a unique data set that might be complementary in terms of just patient health in general, because your health is, more than your gut. Although the gut is incredibly important and increasingly being recognized as important to overall health. It's more, what can you do with that data?
And do you envision a future in which digital technologies could go beyond just measuring and offer treatment?
So I like to think of what we can deliver, sort of my legacy of what I've contributed to mankind, as in two areas. One is for the individual patient, right? Kaushik, you've got a stomach ache, it's been bothering you for a while, and you've had constipation, diarrhea, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor does the gut tracker test, and he comes back and he says, I see something unusual. We're going to treat you this way. In 2 weeks, we're going to do another test to see if it worked, and it does work, and you're doing better. So we've helped individuals. But then think about when we've taken 1,000 Kaushiks or 10,000 or 100,000 IBS patients, IBD patients like my daughter, gastroparesis patients. There are 45 million office visits every year in the US for GI issues. 45 million. So, if we get 2% of those visits, we've got 1 million tests. So it's not unreasonable to think in terms of what can we do with that data, right? Let's take the results of our test, the results like we were talking about, what we provide to the physician, and combine that with the patient's symptoms, and combine that with what interventions were tried, which ones worked and which one didn't. And then this is where I see the opportunities for artificial intelligence, because that starts to be so multidimensional that it goes beyond most people's ability to do the analysis. I mean, I kind of came to this problem with a bit of an unfair advantage, because I was in particle physics, and I was trained to write algorithms and explore data very, very well. But AI can bring that to more people, but more importantly to me, it can get into those areas where you just have these disparate data sets, and it gets very, very hard to do it with human intelligence. And when you have data sets that have 1 million tests in them, then you can really see the opportunities to increase our understanding of what IBS is. You know what IBS is? It's a definition. There's something called the Rome criteria, and it says if you have abdominal pain following a meal and the pain is relieved by defecation, and you've had this for 3 months or more and more than 2 times a week. I'm making things up now, but it's just a
Mm-hmm.
definition based on symptoms. It's not like having heart disease or the
Mm,
flu. It's
right.
just it's just a description. Gastroparesis is nothing more than if you get a gastric emptying scintigraphy test and you have
Mm.
slow emptying, that's gastroparesis. It doesn't say anything about what's causing it. Whereas our test now will go to the next level and we say, well, here's what's going on in your stomach. Here's how your stomach responds to a meal. Here's what's going on downstream of your stomach, which could also be causing the problem in your small intestine and even in your colon, right?
I think this is pretty much like depression, where there are symptoms. If there's a lack of appetite, insomnia, or you're feeling low, or the mood is low, then they call it depression. The collective
Yeah.
representation of symptoms is depression.
So when you're diagnosed with IBS. When you're diagnosed with depression, well, what do? Oh, is there a depression pill and you take that? No,
Yeah.
right? You have IBS. Okay, what's next? Well, we've given you a name,
Yeah.
right? How do you treat it? So that's what happens now. So what happens to a patient who has something like IBS? They go to the doctor and they'll get, the blood workup and family history, and most of the time it's fine. People don't have colon cancer most of the time or an anatomic problem. And then they'll
Mhm.
get some tests, right? They'll get a colonoscopy, they'll get a CT scan, they'll get an ultrasound, and those will find anatomic problems, but not the functional problems that most people have. Functional problems where everything looks fine, but it's not working
Mm.
right. Depression, for example. Brain scan
Yeah.
would show everything looks fine, but it's just not working right. The gut is a second brain. It's complicated. Things go wrong, right?
Yeah.
So they'll get some motility tests. They'll swallow capsules or they'll swallow those things that show up on an x-ray, and they'll get x-rays every day for the next few days. And most of the time it comes back and says, well, that looks pretty normal. And after 6 or 12 months of that and multiple tests and thousands of dollars, the doctors
Mm.
say, well, I know what you don't have. Congratulations, you don't have cancer, but I'm just going to have to treat your symptoms. And if that worked, we wouldn't have 45 million office visits a year for GI problems.
And Steve, what are some of the toughest challenges you've faced in developing and bringing this product to the market? And how did you get through them?
Yeah, I need a drink stronger than the water to answer this one. The biggest challenge in a startup, and we're just 4 people, right, is just attracting capital to get the funding. So this has taken us a long time. If we had had $10 million at the beginning, we could have hired more people and gone faster. So we've had to do a lot of the work
Mm.
ourselves, right? So all of us on the team have had to wear multiple hats:
Mm.
R&D, engineering, medical science, regulatory, quality, FDA clearance, reimbursement, right? So that by far is the biggest challenge to any startup. And we're part of the Fogarty Institute in Mountain View, and we have many sister companies, all early stage medical device startups. And that's everyone's challenge, just being able to attract capital and hire the people that you need to do the work. And then, of course, there are many, many technical challenges as well, including things like you've got to get your FDA clearance, you've got to do clinical
Mm.
trials, you have to recruit patients into the clinical trials, you have to have a quality system that controls everything you do so that the FDA will know, the patients will know that it's been done safely.
Right. And why do you think gastrointestinal health has been overlooked in digital health until recently? And how do you see that changing in the times to come?
Yeah, and so you use the term digital health, and I'll just say in healthcare in general, the amount of innovation in the GI space seems less than in many other areas. It seems like cardiac or pulmonary or neuro. Just look at how many startups there are in these areas. Well, that's where the funding goes, right?
Mm.
And these, it makes sense to an extent. Heart issues, you can die from that, right? And most GI issues, other than colon cancer, if they make life miserable, maybe make it not worth living, but typically they're not going to kill you,
Mm.
right? And so there's been a lot less innovation. And also, I think people don't have that many ideas. There
Yeah.
was a 5 or 10 years ago, you saw a lot of things about bariatric. They were going to come with all different ways of making you feel full so you'd be able to lose weight. They do
Yeah.
surgeries, Roux-en-Y bypass surgeries. They'll put balloons in your stomach and inflate the balloon to make the available volume less. And that was, people were on a kick to do that for a while. Those devices turned out to be of limited effectiveness. And so you don't hear about that as much anymore. I think people didn't have a lot of ideas. It's not like structural. Like a lot of the people I know in Silicon Valley in medical device, they've worked in structural heart. They've come up with a great new valve or a way to repair a valve or a way to ablate nerves that are causing atrial fibrillation, right?
Yes.
There aren't the equivalents so much in the GI space.
Exactly. Yeah.
And cardiac surgeons, they love these things, right? Cardiologists and brain surgeons, they love getting a new gadget. And there is this bias thinking that gastroenterologists, maybe they just want to do their colonoscopies and endoscopies and, go home and aren't that interested in new things. Of course, the people that we work with, the key opinion leaders that we're working with at Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic and Stanford and Penn and Yale and Harvard, of course, they are as much interested in innovation as any cardiologist or brain surgeon.
Absolutely. And what opportunities do you see for startup like yours to collaborate with larger pharmaceutical companies and healthcare providers?
So there's really nice potential synergies there. So just this morning, just prior to our conversation, I was on Zoom with a representative in the science area at a very large pharma company. And we were talking about partnering in areas of GLP-1 drugs and IBD drugs. And the comment was, this is very exciting, talking about our technology, an objective way to measure these things. And we've spoken with multiple other pharma companies for years now. But when you're in a 4-person startup, you want to make a decision today about what you're going to do tomorrow, right? A pharma company, okay, in a month or so, we'll be able to arrange a meeting with another group of people who will then go off and talk about it. And so time passes. In one case, we had a study all prepared to go at a really wonderful American hospital on the East Coast and went through all the processes of getting approval from the IRB. And then there was a reorganization at the pharma company that was going to pay for the study. And even though we were at the contract phase, it all just fell apart. So it's very, very challenging. And you have very little leverage, especially as a small company.
And what next for GTAC Medical? Are there any upcoming developments you're particularly excited about?
Well, these the most recent publications and papers we have in this gastroparesis syndrome, we're expanding from the work we're doing with Dr. Brian Lacey at the Mayo Clinic. We're working with University of South Florida. We have abstracts that have been submitted to the next Digestive Disease Week, Cleveland Clinic, hopefully a few other places. We're really excited about this application to replace gastric emptying scintigraphy, which we've now demonstrated superiority to in a way that's a lot more accessible than the test that requires a gamma camera, which not that many people have gamma cameras. I'm sure you don't have a gamma camera, and your gastroenterologist doesn't. Mayo Clinic does, right? So that's really exciting. And then we have a paper that we're working on now on the Crohn's study that we did at Stanford University. And my daughter, Lindsay, who has Crohn's disease, she's going to be the first author on that paper. So it's really fun to see that coming together. And then we have some other people working in exciting areas like constipation and postoperative recovery. So pretty sexy areas, right?
Yeah, that's all sounds fascinating and very exciting.
For the right person, it's exciting.
Yeah, great. And what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who want to break into the medical device industry?
Yeah, I'm trying hard not to say don't. It's hard. I mean, as I was saying before, raising funding to be able to build a team to do things is hard. And then compared to tech, in tech, and here we are in Silicon Valley, lots of tech companies, right? You create something and you can sell it, right? And if it doesn't work well, they use that term, fail quickly. And fake it till you make it, but you can't do that in the medical area, in medical devices. You've got to get it to work and you've got to prove that it works, right? And that's a painstaking process, and you have lots of requirements in your quality system coming from the regulatory areas, right? So what's the advice? Well, do the smart thing. So Stanford has a biodesign program, and they've written a book and they teach, make sure you're finding a need. So the easiest thing in a way is coming up with a product that works, but is it really needed? And is it needed in a way that there's a big enough market and it's better than what currently exists by a big enough gap there between what currently exists and what you can do? Then ask those other questions. Do the study before you create the product. Say, does this work in the workflow for physicians? Can I get reimbursed? What are the barriers for doctors to actually adopt this? Right. What we're going through right now is when you go through the checklist for investors, they have all the risks, and we've retired the risk about whether this works or not, and will we get FDA clearance, and will we get a CPT code, and do you have data that is actionable? And so we're proud every step of the way that we've retired those risks. But the last one that most investors saying they're waiting for is, but do you know that doctors are going to buy it? Right? We would like to see evidence of adoption. We want to see revenue. And that's just like the thing with the insurance companies. That's another catch-22. I show you that I have doctors buying it if I don't have enough money to hire a sales staff.
How does the competition look like in this area, in this sector?
A couple different areas of competition. There's the old tests, right, that I talked about. And they usually they test one organ at a time, not the full gut. They test you for an hour or 4 hours or short time. They test under artificial conditions. You've evacuated your GI tract, or you're in the doctor's office, or you're lying in a couch or something like that. Then there's some newer things, and we have friends in a New Zealand company called Olimetry that have created sort of the modern version of the old electrogastrography. So they've come up with a pretty slick device, a really good group of people. It's like a pad that goes across the abdomen, and it's got lots of electrodes, but it's for 4 hours in the doctor's office, and because of the way it's made, you have to lie still for 4 hours, and they even say don't talk. So, and they only measure the stomach. So I think there are really good applications for that because they provide a somewhat richer data set in some ways, and they have some really wonderful people on the team, but they don't do what we do. They don't make the measurements at home, and they don't measure the whole gut. So to some extent, we're complementary. As I said, we're friendly with them, and we wish each other success. We think the market is big enough for both of us. But yeah, other than that, there just isn't much more innovation.
Right. And that leads me very nicely into my next question. Do you have any plans of launching this in other parts of the world, say Europe, UK, or in Asia Pacific?
Well, we've definitely had interest from people, Asia Pacific, and everywhere in the world, people have GI issues, but we don't have the bandwidth to do that. So my plan for launching other places is to get to the point where we are purchased by a large company that can take on that task.
Right. What's been the most fulfilling part of your work with GTAC Medical?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm working on this as a passion project.
Yes.
Fulfilling, the thing that drives me to still be working when I'm at retirement age is the fact that I'm potentially doing something that'll make a difference to millions of people, but most especially in my own family. And the opportunity to work with my daughter. She's been part of the team for about 6 years now since getting her master's in translational medicine degree from Berkeley and UC San Francisco. So I see her every day, and we work together on things. So that's wonderfully fulfilling as a dad. I used to coach her softball team, and now I'm coaching her in medical device development.
Wow, that's amazing. And probably, I would say, being a father, that's the most rewarding aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. But another thing that's really wonderful about is being part of this community. So when I was making nuclear and X-ray sensors, it was interesting scientifically and technologically, but I was helping people make like slightly higher quality paper and plastic film,
Mm.
but being part of the medical device community, being part of this Fogarty innovation where I have sister companies, the motivations there are very different, right? Everyone is trying to do something for humanity. So many people have stories like mine
Mm.
with a family member or themselves with an issue. And it's just an honor to be part of that group and to know those people. I mean, that's why you're doing your podcast, right? Because you're getting to talk
Yes.
to people. You're not interviewing people that are coming up with the next Facebook. Right? You're interviewing people that are coming up with the next cure for something or
Absolutely.
diagnostic for something.
Yeah, and I feel totally blessed to have had this opportunity of speaking to people like you, having an hour and a half. That's like the biggest reward for me. Being able to learn so much in every conversation is just so rewarding, and probably the part that I like most about doing this work.
Yeah. I think about you a little bit, and you are talking to so many people. And as you do this, you're just going to get exposed to so many ideas and stories about what people are doing and how they came to be doing it, and you're just going to keep accumulating that knowledge. Um,
It's so inspiring. Yeah. Every conversation, every success story, it inspires me so much. I think I can't thank you all enough for joining this show, for helping me learn so much.
and not just you learn it, but now you're sharing it with other people.
Yes, all the audience. I received so many messages in my mailbox thanking me for sharing these insights from guests like you, because everybody benefits from this knowledge. Yeah,
So people
absolutely.
actually watch or listen to the podcast, huh?
Well, some of them do. I wish more did, but yeah, I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah, I think you're so good at what you're doing that it
That's
makes it
very
very
kind of you.
enjoyable to watch.
That's incredibly kind of you. So before we conclude the episode, one last question. Running a growing company must be so demanding. How do you manage to maintain such a balance between your work and personal life?
So we're a small company, right?
Mm.
And hopefully we will be a growing company when we raise our next round of funding. When you're the CEO in particular, but any role in a startup really, it is your life. Work-life balance, they aren't two separate things. Work is life and life is work to an extent. And the
Yeah.
only counter argument to that, which I know will resonate with you from what you said, is what about your family? Right? You
Mm.
can't ignore your family. You have kids, you have a spouse. And so there you've got to always make sure that you've given that a priority. It's certainly the most stressful thing I've ever done.
That brings us to the end of our today's episode. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and for sharing such valuable insights. It's been fascinating to hear about your journey from physics to leading GTAC Medical and the incredible work you're doing to advance wearable health technologies for gastrointestinal care. Your dedication to improving patient outcomes and tackling some of the unmet needs in healthcare is truly inspiring. I especially appreciated your thoughts on the future of wearable technology and how it's transforming the healthcare landscape. On behalf of our audience and myself, I want to express my gratitude for your openness, expertise, and the meaningful work you are doing to make a difference. I know our listeners will take away so much from this conversation. And thank you once again for being part of Drug Diaries. I hope we can stay in touch, and I look forward to following the continued success of GTAC Medical.
Well, thank you, Kaushik. It's a real honor to be part of this, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Likewise, thank you.